No, in a moment, we'll be going to all the big numbers, but let me introduce all our guests first. Joining me now on the show is India Today's editorial director, Raj Chengappa, is also with us. Yashwant Deshmukh, the cephalogist of CSDS. Remember, they've put together this poll. Rahul Verma, fellow at the Center for Policy Research. Syed Zafar Islam, Rajya Sabha MP and National Spokesperson BJP. Vibhakar Shastri, Spokesperson Congress. Raghav Chadda, Aam Aadmi Party's MLA and their person in charge in Punjab and their national spokesperson. So all bases covered at the start of this show. But first, of course, let me take you to the first big number that I'm taking you to. The first big question that we've asked in the Mood of the Nation poll. Remember, we told you we'll give you a sense of what's happening in the states. So one of the things is the performance of chief ministers in these states. Take a look at what our poll says when it comes to chief ministerial performance. We start with the big state of Uttar Pradesh. What is the level of satisfaction when it comes to the performance of the UP government? 49% say they are satisfied. For Yogi Adityanath, Chief Minister, remember, somewhat satisfied, 17%. Dissatisfied is 34%. So that's the first big number. Yogi Adityanath just below that 50% mark on total satisfaction levels. Let's turn to the next state. We turn to Punjab, where the performance of Punjab Chief Minister, 33% satisfied with Charanjit Singh Channi, taken over just a couple of months ago. Somewhat satisfied, 30%. And not satisfied is 37%. So Mr. Channi still struggling to establish himself fully in Punjab. Let's turn to the next state. We turn to the state of Uttarakhand. There you have Pushkar Dhami, 41% are satisfied with the performance of the Chief Minister. Somewhat satisfied is 26%. Dissatisfied is 34%. So no chief minister so far crossing that 50% mark in satisfaction. The fourth state that we turn to is the state of Goa, where with Pramod Sawant, satisfaction level is just 27%. Somewhat satisfied, 39%. So an average rating there coming for the chief minister. Dissatisfied is 34%. Finally, Manipur, and look at there, where we look at Nipendra Singh, 39% are satisfied with the Chief Minister. Somewhat satisfied is 28%, and dissatisfied or unsatisfied is 33%. That's the first big question that we want. Yashwant, give us a sense. You've extrapolated from the national poll into these state numbers. What is the big picture, according to you, that's emerging?
Well, obviously, Rajdeep, that the sentiment of anti-incumbency is pretty much in, and it has been working very strongly against the sitting MLAs as well. But yes, each and every state has a different story to tell. You know, on the face of it, it looks like Chief Minister Yogi of Uttar Pradesh has been carrying maximum satisfaction among his own set of supporters. But remind you that he also carries the maximum number of people who are dissatisfied as well, if you look at the otherwise. So probably because he is a polarizing figure, that he is loved and hated, I mean, in a very strong terms, probably he is getting those kind of numbers. But otherwise, Channi, I would say, has been a very good wild card for the Congress, because if you will compare the numbers of Channi with Amrinder Singh, you will see that he has done a lot of damage control as far as the Congress leadership is concerned. The problem is that Mr. Channi's leadership is always questioned by more than the opposition rather than his own party mates, and that is what is clear danger or challenge for Mr. Channi. Right now, he is grappling with his own party more than what he is grappling with his opposition right now.
The first word that was used there by Yashwant was anti-incumbency. You know, there's a sense that no chief minister is getting 60% or more. There is no overwhelming satisfaction with any chief minister. Yogi Adityanath fares a bit better than the others. Is that a sense that we are at the end of a 5-year term of all these governments? So a level of anti-incumbency seems to have set in almost all the states.
Absolutely, Rajdeep. And if you look, we didn't just look at these 5 chief ministers. We also looked at all the other chief ministers. And if you see the, and if it's being projected later on this, there is a whole lot of other chief ministers, including Naveen Patnaik, who are scoring far above 40, 43, 45, going right up to 70%. And in those places, they somehow seem to have convinced their electorate that whatever work that they've done is paying off. And I think the question to ask in this and to look at is, have the chief ministers, is this a reflection? I know this is, we put the caveat, right? This is a national poll. It's unfair to just look at this particular figure. But the question can be asked, has the state chief minister delivered sufficiently? And as if Yashwant is saying, there's so much of negative vote, he better watch out.
You know, Rahul Verma, before Rahul Kanwal takes over with the politician, just a quick word from you. State elections are often seen as a referendum on the performance of chief ministers because elections are getting presidential. Should these numbers worry all these 5 chief ministers, given that no one is crossing certainly the 60% mark, all in fact below 50%?
I wouldn't say so. I think if the net satisfaction rating, which is basically satisfied minus dissatisfied, is in the positive direction, I think after 5-year term, chief ministers should be okay with that. Of course, it would be ideal to have a higher satisfaction rating going beyond 50 and 60%, but given the level of incumbency, as Yashwantji mentioned, that's, I think, fine. I think what's happening among the 5 chief ministers you actually mentioned, basically there is a division, right? Yogi Adityanath and Manipur CM Ibobi Singh is basically around 40 or above 40.
Nipender Singh,
especially Channi in Punjab, Pradeep Sawant in Goa, and Dhami in Uttarakhand. All these 3 chief ministers are basically were appointed in last 6 months to 1 year, right? So there is also that these are newcomers, didn't get enough time to do what they wanted to do. And perhaps in the anti-incumbency sentiment, political instability, at least at the chief minister level, is also being reflected in those numbers. At least Adityanath and Singh basically got all 5 years to govern.
Okay, so N. Biren Singh in Manipur and Adityanath are 5-year chief ministers. Remember, Adityanath in that sense, net positive is higher than the other chief ministers. Rahul, your first reaction, Rahul Kanwal.
Let's take our viewers through the Prime Minister's performance in the Mood of the Nation opinion poll in these 5 states. We look at his national performance later, but let's take a look at how Uttar Pradesh is ranking the performance of Prime Minister Modi. And here, if we combine good and outstanding, Prime Minister Modi gets a ranking of 75%, people saying his work has been satisfactory. Average is only 9%, poor is 16%, which essentially means in Uttar Pradesh, the Prime Minister's connect with the people of the state still seems to be extremely strong. The moment you cut away from Uttar Pradesh and you come to Punjab, and you'll notice the numbers in Punjab in data set after data set, there is a big divergence. While in Uttar Pradesh, people love Prime Minister Modi, it's not the case in Punjab, where on account of various factors and most prominently the farmer protest, which has raged through the state over the last several months, the Prime Minister's popularity is much lower than it is anywhere in northern India. In Punjab, only 37% of the respondents feel the Prime Minister's performance is either good or excellent, which is about half of his popularity in Uttar Pradesh, where it was 75%. Average is 16%, and those who think the Prime Minister is not doing a good job stand at 44%. So Punjab, as I said, starkly different from the picture in neighboring Haryana, Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan. No matter where you look, Punjab is that one island which Prime Minister Modi, despite his professed love for Sikhs and for Punjabis, hasn't been able to capture the imagination of. After this, let's come to Uttarakhand. And if you look at the performance of the Prime Minister here, it's lesser than it is in Uttar Pradesh. Uttar Pradesh was 75, Uttarakhand is only 59, but it's 6 out of 10 thinking that he's done a good or excellent job, which is a fair number for the Prime Minister to get. 16% think he's been average, 20% think the Prime Minister has been poor in the hill state of Uttarakhand. And we're looking at the poll-bound states first because that's where the maximum electoral consequence resides, because you've got polls which will conclude on the 10th of March, and that's where the maximum amount of excitement is as well. From there, let's now cut across to the coastal state of Goa, where 67% think the Prime Minister has done a good or excellent job, 13% think he's been average, and 20% think he's been poor. Remember, in 4 out of the 5 states where elections are being held, it's the BJP which is currently in government, and therefore it is for them to try and beat anti-incumbency and come back to power if they can. Let's now finally cut across to Manipur, where the numbers are just lesser than Uttar Pradesh. 73% think the Prime Minister has done a good or excellent job. In fact, look out for Northeast numbers through this program, because you'll see, despite the BJP having done very well in 2019, if elections were to be held in the northeastern states now, this Mood of the Nation poll is suggesting that their tally could actually go up. Average in Manipur is only 8% and poor 18%. I want to go across to Syed Zafar Islam on this big divergence between Uttar Pradesh and Punjab. 75% of the respondents in Uttar Pradesh think the Prime Minister has done a good or excellent job, which is very useful for the BJP ahead of elections in this big state. But the moment you cut across to Punjab, and no matter what the BJP says about the Prime Minister liking Sikhs, liking Punjabis, his rating crashes to about half of his popularity in Uttar Pradesh. Zafar Islam.
Thank you, Rahul. Let me first respond to the first question of the popularity or the satisfaction level of chief ministers, each chief minister. If you just count the population, add the population of 4 states and deduct by the population of Uttar Pradesh, then you will realize that there are many such states will submerge in Uttar Pradesh. So, because the population of Uttar Pradesh is 24 crore, while the population of these states put together will be not even exceeding 6-7 crores. So that suggests that the popularity of 49% or a satisfaction level of 49% of the Honorable Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh is huge, because he has been able to satisfy, despite a population of 24 crore, he has the satisfaction level of 49% plus. More or less satisfied is 17-18%. Put together is like more than 60% people are satisfied compared to what other numbers you have indicated. Away from that, you were talking about the Prime Minister and his popularity or acceptance level or level of satisfaction of his work in various states, Punjab versus Uttar Pradesh. Trust me, since it has been ruled by some other political parties, many of the schemes have not been implemented on the ground of welfare scheme, which has been meant for the poor and the marginalized section of the society, which has not been implemented the way we have been able to implement in various states ruled by Bharatiya Janata Party. And also the numbers which, or the sample survey which has been done, or it was during the agitation by the farmers. So I'm sure that they must have echoed their sentiments, and that is something away from the popularity. Probably they must have sounded.
But it's interesting. It's interesting that you're saying that in the one state where the opposition is ruling, out of the 5, the Prime Minister's popularity doesn't match that of where BJP states are ruling. In a way, this perhaps reflects what the BJP would like to suggest, that where they have chief ministers, it's a double engine ki sarkar. But Vibhakar Shastri, there's good and bad news for the opposition and the Congress. There seems to be a measure of anti-incumbency certainly creeping in most of the states, but the Prime Minister's popularity by and large, except for Punjab, remains high. So therefore, in an election of this kind, state election, the opposition will have to deal with the possibility that the Modi Sarkar at the center, their popularity is much higher than the state governments. How do you see these poll findings?
Good evening, Rajdeep, and good evening to all my fellow panelists. Rajdeep, let us concentrate on the 5 poll-bound states, and rather than what image the Prime Minister is having all over the country. Let me tell you, as far as UP and Punjab, because we've been discussing that a lot, are concerned, UP, the Honorable Prime Minister said this fight is between 80-20. So I think the ratio is already half there, because it's just 40-odd% showing that they prefer the Chief Minister, and the rest are saying they might prefer, and the rest are saying they don't. So I don't think it's a 80-20 fight. The Chief Minister is well below that mark. So I think the fight there is pretty even between all the three parties concerned, whether it's the BJP or the Samajwadi Party and of course the Congress. With our new narrative as far as the women empowerment is concerned, I think on the ground it's hitting it very well and we are doing pretty well. And as far as Punjab is concerned, the Honorable Chief Minister, Mr. Channi, has done a reasonably good job. And as we have been telling in different TV debates also, that we want the government and the party to run in hand, and that's what is happening. So people debate about Sidhu coming in, Mr. Sidhu coming in and talking about the Honorable Chief Minister, criticizing him. That's not the way, that's not how we look at it. वो प्रदेश के वो पार्टी के अध्यक्ष हैं ये चीफ मिनिस्टर हैं. So
that may be not how you're looking at it.
As far as Uttarakhand is concerned.
No, Mr. Vibhakar Shastri, that's not how you may be looking at it.
I think his performance.
But the fact is that Mr. Channi and Mr. Sidhu seem to be at cross ends. But let's keep our focus on the big picture for a moment. Raghav Chadha, the big picture that is clearly emerging is that chief ministers are more vulnerable at the moment possibly and state governments than the Prime Minister himself. Am I to understand that even for the Aam Aadmi Party in Punjab, the primary target therefore is to target the state government? This is not an election about Mr. Modi's performance. It is going to be an election about each chief minister's performance.
Yes, Mr. Sardesai, this is an election to elect the MLAs and not the MPs, and thereby elect the chief minister of a particular state and not the prime minister of the country. And therefore, the numbers that hold a lot of relevance today are the performance ratings of respective chief ministers. Now, I was paying a lot of attention to the numbers that you had put out, particularly for the state of Punjab, since I'm looking after the state of Punjab for my political party. I'm doing this conversation with you, this debate with you, sitting in Punjab. And I can tell you that as far as the satisfaction rating of Charanjit Singh Channi goes, it is abysmally low. In fact, it is lower than the Prime Minister's approval rating in Punjab. So if the figures are correct, Channi Saab's satisfactory rating is 33% and the Prime Minister's satisfactory rating is 37%. The Prime Minister of India, who is a hated politician, most unpopular in the state of Punjab, somehow still in terms of his performance is above Charanjit Singh Channi, which is a cause of worry and concern and should be for the Congress party. That's point number one. Point number two, it would be incorrect and unfair to just look at the performance rating of Charanjit Singh Channi over the last 111 days. He has been the chief minister for roughly 111 days. And prior to him, for almost 1700 days, we had Captain Amrinder as the chief minister. So we should look at the satisfactory rating of Captain Saab for those 1,700 days and the satisfactory rating of Channi Saab for 111 days and do a pro rata and then arrive at a overall Congress satisfaction rate, and that would give you the right picture. And the picture would be that literally every single Punjabi is of the view that this Congress government has perhaps been the most nikammi government that the people of Punjab have ever seen. Captain Saab didn't step out of his mahal over the last 4.5 years.
You have cherry-picked very intelligently the numbers that give you a sense of rising anti-incumbency, but Yashwant Deshmukh, just a minute. In these two sets of graphics that we provided, would it be right, Yashwant, to say that the Prime Minister's popularity is what's pulling up the BJP governments? The chief ministers don't remain, in most instances, even half as popular as the Prime Minister, except Yogi Adityanath. In all the other states, the chief minister's popularity is mostly well below that of the Prime Minister. And therefore, that's the problem for the BJP in a state election where the chief minister will be the focus.
Absolutely, Rajdeep. And actually, if you compare the overall things, a broad trend, you will realize that Prime Minister's satisfaction rating are almost 30% more approximately than his chief ministers. And NDA central government's satisfaction rating is almost like 20% more than their state government. So obviously, in the pecking order, you can very well say that, in terms of the leadership evaluation for the BJP or the NDA, the central leadership is an asset and their state leadership is clearly a liability. While in the case of Congress or the UPA, probably, I don't want to use the harsh word, but probably it's the other way around, because the satisfaction ratings of majority of the Congress state leaders in their respective states, right now you can only see Chennai, but if you look into the other numbers, for example, the numbers that Harish Rawat is polling in our state tracker that we are doing for ABP, his numbers are way ahead than the Congress central leadership. And that probably is true in case of Bhupesh Baghel in Chhattisgarh or any other Congress ruled state. So it's a kind of a weird combination. Some may say that, BJP is likely to poll approximately 10 to 15 points less than what they poll in Lok Sabha whenever they go to an assembly. I like to put the same fact in the other way around. Whenever there is a Lok Sabha election voting intention, in our traver, we have always figured out 10 to 15% of what you can say as a Modi dividend for the BJP in that way. Otherwise, it is as far as their state leadership is concerned, I am not mincing my words. Majority of the state leaderships of the BJP, barring the state of Assam, has been more of a liability than an asset.
Very interesting, because clearly we've seen this pattern come post 2019 Lok Sabha, where the BJP's vote share seems to decline in state elections compared to Lok Sabha. And let's turn therefore to the performance of the NDA and how that is seen in these 5 states. In Uttar Pradesh, 69% said that they were satisfied with the performance of the NDA. That's the central government. Neither satisfied nor unsatisfied was 8%, unsatisfied was 22%. So again, NDA performs better than the state government in UP. In Punjab, satisfaction levels 34% with the NDA, 13% neither satisfied nor unsatisfied. And here the dissatisfaction level very high with the NDA also, 51%. So Punjab remains the outlier, both at the state and central level. The NDA and the BJP are taking a hit in Punjab, not surprising given the farmer unrest and other issues in that state. Uttarakhand, 57% satisfied with the performance of the NDA, neither satisfied nor unsatisfied, 18%, 19% unsatisfied. Goa, 50% satisfied. Remember, it was much lower for the state government. Neither satisfied nor unsatisfied, 21%, 29% unsatisfied. Manipur, 66% high satisfaction level with the NDA. Neither satisfied nor unsatisfied, 8%, 25% unsatisfied. Let me get you in, Raj, on this, because there seems to be this divergence that when you look at the state government's performance, the voters are not half as enthused as they look at the center. It's almost as if there's a complete disjunction between a BJP government in a state, as Yashwant was pointing out, and the center, and the reverse is the case with the Congress.
I think several messages are coming through in this analysis. One is that if Mr. Modi is standing for the Lok Sabha, clearly even in the state that may not vote for the BJP, they might vote for Mr. Modi. That's the sort of sense you get. Second is, I think Yashwant was talking about the Modi dividend that's there. Would this kind of popularity that Mr. Modi has in the BJP states, the so-called double engine states, translate into votes in the coming elections? From what we have seen in the past couple of elections since 2017, that has been a diminishing return. If you look at some of the major states that went to polls, say after 2017, whether it's Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Rajasthan, West Bengal, down south, Tamil Nadu, all these states, the Modi factor was not a major player in that sense, though he was highly popular. But when it came to the states, voting for the state chief ministers or state government, that might have had a certain percentage, but not enough to give the BJP the victory they wanted.
Rahul Verma, are you surprised with that? Or does this happen cephalogically, that the voter is looking at the state and the center very, very differently? We've seen it post 2019 in particular, Jharkhand, Haryana, Bihar, all these states, BJP doing much worse in a state election compared to the center. And Yashwant seems to point out, with the Congress, it's reverse. They seem to, voters look at the state leadership of the Congress more favorably than their central leadership.
Rajdeep, while I agree with the intent of that statement, I don't think there is anything unique about this phenomena. It always happened in the Indian politics. Think about the period of 60s and 70s and 80s. Congress used to win national governments and form governments at the national level, but in states it was always seeing competition. So it's not as if something unique is happening at the moment. Yes, Prime Minister Modi remains one of the biggest vote aggregators in the recent time, and BJP gets some advantage of it during national elections and even in state elections. So yes, there is a gap between national and state election in BJP's performance, but it's not just because of Prime Minister contesting in national election, he's on the ticket, but not in the state election. Factors change, right? Like issues become different. Caste alignments basically come to much more fore during state election. Two level of elections are always going to be different. And let me, if I just have to point data, in West Bengal in 2019, BJP got 37% votes, same number of votes it got in assembly election. And look for any state, Haryana or Uttarakhand or Maharashtra, yes, there is a gap of 10 to 15%. But can you at 10 or 15% say that voters in India look at national and state elections very differently? Even in Haryana, BJP, which was a minor party before 2014, is now running its second consecutive government. So it's not as if things are happening completely different in national or state elections.
Before I go back to you, Rahul Kanwal, very quickly, Syed Zafar Islam, should that worry you?
Okay.
Because we've seen that states where the BJP sweeps Lok Sabha, you are finding it more and more difficult, particularly when you are in power, to face anti-incumbency with state governments. Your state leaderships are not half as effective as the Prime Minister.
Well, if you just analyze in free India, the most popular leader is the Honorable Prime Minister, because the kind of popularity he is enjoying, no one has ever enjoyed in free India. So obviously anybody, whether it's a state chief minister of BJP ruled state or for that matter, any other state chief minister, the popularity rating will definitely see very different numbers, because he is one of the most popular.
No, but are you worried? Are you worried with 4 of the 5 states going to the polls ruled by the BJP? Are you worried about anti-incumbency facing your chief ministers, particularly outside Uttar Pradesh?
Coming back to that, we use every resources available with the party, and the Honorable Prime Minister happens to be one of the very prominent resource. He is the tallest leader in the party, and he is as he rightly, Mr. Verma said, he is the one who aggregates the votes as well. So definitely we will be using as extensively as we can, and it has always benefited the party. And in the upcoming election in the 5 states, it is going to make the difference as well. And we are
Rahul, you want to take over?
We are going to
okay, I take your point. Let me go to Rahul Kanwal. Rahul, you want to take over because, the sense of this whole double engine idea. Do you get a sense, Rahul, that is under strain?
What we're going to do now is give our viewers a sense of what might happen in these big poll-bound states if elections were held today. And before I take you through the numbers, I want to build this important caveat that these are Lok Sabha projections. They've been done at a time when there's an assembly election happening, but these are not opinion polls for these poll-bound states. This is what might happen in these states if elections were held today for the Lok Sabha. So with that caveat clearly stated, let me take you through what might happen in that big state of Uttar Pradesh, about which there is so much interest, if Lok Sabha elections were to be held today. The Mood of the Nation opinion poll done by Sea Voter for India Today group suggests that the NDA, that's the BJP and its smaller allies in the state of Uttar Pradesh, could bag 67 out of the 80 seats. Remember, if you look at the 2019 data, the BJP plus had 64 seats. So that's 3 more than they would have got in 2019, and that is for Uttar Pradesh. Others at 12, the UPA at 1. So we've kept the SP and the Congress separate. So SP, BSP together is just 12, and Yashwant can then try and break that up for us when we go to him later. But essentially, the BJP plus in Uttar Pradesh at 67 seats. From there, let's go to Punjab. Now, this is interesting because it gives you some insights of how people are thinking, but it's not in the context of an assembly election. It's in the context of a Lok Sabha election. So in Punjab, on the 13 Lok Sabha seats, if elections were held today, the Mood of the Nation projection is that the UPA could bag 8 seats. That's the Congress with 8 seats. The others are at 5, which includes the Aam Aadmi Party and whatever the Akalis and the BJP would have got. So, sorry, the BJP is at 0. So, AAP and the Akalis are at 5, the Congress at 8, NDA along with Amrinder Singh at 0 in Punjab for Lok Sabha elections. From there, let's go to the hill state of Uttarakhand, where in the 2019 elections, as was the case before that in 2014, where the BJP bagged all the hill state seats, the same is likely to happen if elections are held right now, 5-0 in favor of the BJP in Uttarakhand. And the last data that we have is for Goa. And here, once again, the NDA likely to bag both the seats that are on offer. In the 2019 elections, they had one they'd lost, but this time they're likely to bag both. So Yashwant, could you explain some of these other numbers in Uttar Pradesh? I would assume that a lot of the others are actually the SP, and do you have a breakup for that, and can you share that? And the fact that the BJP doesn't even open its account in Punjab, and how the Congress seems to be still picking up 8 seats despite the fact that there is a fair amount of anti-incumbency in the state against the state government.
Rahul, first I will start with Uttar Pradesh because the 12 figure looks at the others. Actually, 10 are Samajwadi Party and only 2 to the Bahujan Samaj Party. We are literally looking at some sort of a meltdown right now in numbers for the BSP in the tracker, and that is self-explanatory. In Punjab, the others 5 actually are Aam Aadmi Party and only 1 lead for the Shiromani Akali Dal as far as the Lok Sabha trend is concerned. However, I must say that, in terms of vote share, it is only a gap of 2% as far as the Lok Sabha voting intention is concerned between Aam Aadmi Party and the Congress. And that is pretty evident because, Rahul, you remember in Delhi also, Aam Aadmi Party polled almost like 50% in assembly election, that crashed down to 18%, and then again they polled up to 53% in Delhi. So somehow still people are, when they look at the national level, there is a considerable number even in Punjab, because in our, as I said, in our other trackers, that the state trackers that we are running, we are consistently finding Aam Aadmi Party as a 5% lead over the Congress as far as the voting intention of the state is concerned. That's a tracker that we run for the ABP. But here at the Lok Sabha level, there is a slight 2% edge to the Congress. But largely speaking, Rahul, it seems that that Congress, as far as its own internal work is considered, they are somehow losing ground or losing the momentum even in the states where they should be getting by default gain. For a state like Uttarakhand, for example, BJP changing 3 chief ministers in 6 months. I mean, what kind of confidence level do you think any party would deal with as far as elections are concerned? But still you are finding BJP comfortably ahead in spite and despite of the fact that time against multiple surveys have shown that Harish Rawat happens to be the leading most popular guy in Uttarakhand. But still Congress is unable to actually even openly tell that he is the chief ministerial candidate.
Let me take that point. Let's look at that, because we also asked, rate the Congress's role as the main opposition within these 5 states. How do you see the Congress at the center, its role in taking on the Modi government? In Uttar Pradesh, 31% said good, 16% said average, and 50% said poor when we asked them to rate the Congress's role. In Punjab, 36% said good, 10% said average, and 47% said poor. In Uttarakhand, 25% said good, 13% said average, and 58% said poor. In Goa, it was 30% good, 40% average, 30% poor. So Goa is the one state where the Congress's performance 30 plus 40 seems a little better than the other states. Manipur, 41% said good, 12% said average, 45% said poor. But if you look at it across these states, barring Goa, the Congress's performance is by and large seen as poor in many of these states. So Vibhakar Shastri, BJP clearly vulnerable at the state level, especially in states which they are losing. The Congress's ability to exploit that, which Yashwant said, is questionable. I mean, that is really, you don't seem to aggressively want to project Harish Rawat in Uttarakhand, even though our numbers for him seem to suggest that he would do rather well as the chief ministerial candidate. Is there a sense that the Congress, unlike the BJP here, your national leadership needs to push up your state leadership rather than the other way around? Your state leaders are doing better than your national leaders.
No. No, Rajdeep, Congress, we have always been in a believe in collective leadership as far as different states are concerned. And Mr. Harish Rawatji is the campaign committee chairman. And of course, there is a PCC president, and the elected MLAs would decide who the chief minister would be, who the CLP leader would be. So I don't think that, it's been a tradition with the Congress announcing chief minister's candidate names before. I don't think even BJP, except for Mr. Yogi Adityanath, where they're forced to do this because of the 80-20 formula they want to work on, Hindu versus the Muslim. Otherwise, I don't think even BJP has announced any candidate in their ruling states.
No, but
let's not go there.
Let me be more direct. Do you believe your central leadership is a drag at times on state governments, on potential state governments that the Congress can have? That the best route really for the Congress is empower your chief ministers, project them strongly, and they may be more successful.
No, see, as far as our governments are concerned, whether it's Rajasthan, whether it's Chhattisgarh, whether it's Punjab, everywhere the chief minister is doing whatever they're supposed to do. They have a manifesto before the elections, and they follow that manifesto. Whatever is committed by the party, they follow to the T. So, I mean, the central leadership does not interfere in their day-to-day working. So, I don't think there's a conflict of interest there. And central leadership works on a different, as far as the Lok Sabha elections are concerned, or even the Vidhan Sabha elections are concerned. So, it's a different, I don't think there's any conflict there.
One of the issues, of course, that we look at in depth in the mood of the nation is the economy. But just in these 5 states, if you look at it, and this is perhaps the one concern why anti-incumbency seems to exist at one level. We asked opinion on unemployment situation, for example. 70% in the state of Uttar Pradesh said that the unemployment situation was serious. Neutral was just 9%, not serious 19%. So 70 said it was serious. In Punjab, it went up to as high 88% said unemployment situation is serious. 6% only said not serious. In Uttarakhand, when we went, it was 81% who said it was serious. 5% said neutral, not serious was 12. Goa, 71% said serious was unemployment. Just 21% said not serious. Manipur, 80% and not serious, 10%. We are seeing this pattern emerging, Raj, in your mood of the nation. We saw it even 4 months ago in August. Employment, economy is the troubling issue on the ground, which is leading sometimes to anti-incumbency at the state, local level.
Without doubt, Rajdeep. And these are 2 factors, both rising prices and unemployment, that will, in some senses, if you see across popularity, even with Mr. Modi, when we come finally to that, begins to impact him as well. But when we are looking at the state, there are 2 factors. One, if you're looking at why in the Congress is, there's a disparity between the national leadership and what the state leadership seems stronger. If you look at it, it's largely because the national leadership doesn't seem to have a very strong narrative against Mr. Modi. After all, we are looking at these numbers are Lok Sabha numbers. So if in UP, for instance, if BJP continues to sweep at 67 seats as was projected, or in other states where Congress is ruling, it still seems to be ahead of it, except in Punjab, we've seen that. It is a fact that the Congress or the other parties that are there have not come up with an alternative narrative to Mr. Modi. So whatever happens, he is still the best bet to deliver. So even on the economy, while jobs is going to be a serious problem for the BJP and the NDA, there's no doubt about it, as well as this. For a certain amount of time, there was tolerance levels because of COVID and the fact that it damaged the economy. So people said, yes, it's an international problem now. But I think in the next year, and this will also have an impact in this elections, if this perception that they have not delivered on these 2 fronts continues, they would have problems in the states.
Because we asked people your economic status since 2014. In Uttar Pradesh, 26% said they had improved. 35% said deteriorated, no change was 36%. In Punjab, only 5% said their economic status has improved since 2014. deteriorated said 52%, no change 36. In Uttarakhand, 34% said improved, deteriorated 26, no change 36. In Goa, 10% said improved, 70% said deteriorated, 20% said no change. Manipur, 20% improved, 41% no change, 35% deteriorated. You know, it's the economy stupid at some level, Rahul Verma. When you look at these numbers, unemployment, economic status, you get a sense that on the ground, there is discontent, and therefore whoever is in power in a state government has to combat this sense that you're not, there's no feel-good factor at the moment. There's a feel-bad factor, in fact.
But that's not happening in electoral outcomes, Rajdeep. Think
so
about
explain that. Explain that. Why is that? Why is that this doesn't reflect in electoral outcomes?
Because even in 2021, Assam government came back, West Bengal government came back, Kerala government came back. Only in Tamil Nadu, the basically,
there was change.
DMK took AIDMK. So I think, and look at the level of divisions within the state, right? The numbers in UP and Punjab, why do they differ? Is the economic condition in Punjab and UP so widely different? I think what's happening in Indian politics, that a large section of people have already decided who they are siding with. And then on most of the questions, they are basically reflecting partisan opinion. And that's why basically whatever they are saying on, so I don't think anyone is going to deny that economic situation has not been great in past 2-3 years, especially after, like it was bad before COVID. COVID just sort of like accelerated that situation. Despite that, we are not seeing any big change in the government. So yes, one reason could be, as Rajji pointed out, that people still at the national level might see Modi as one who might perform because there is no other alternative at the national level. But we are not seeing any big change even at the state level. 2020, Bihar, the government came back. So I don't know whether economy, while it may remain an important factor in voters' mind, it's actually changing governments in that sense at the state level.
Yashwant, you want to quickly respond to that? Is that a big takeaway from your poll?
I actually agree with him because it baffles me many a times, Rajdeep, because I have always seen that whenever on our tracker, corruption and inflation, they go up, they usually they kind of result in an anti-incumbent verdict. Out here, what I can sense that none of the governments which got replicated, as Rahul mentioned last year also, their perception towards corruption was actually remarkably low against the chief ministers. You know, all the chief ministers were generally taken as a very clean chief ministers as far as the issue of corruption is concerned. I guess that probably it's the goodwill, sometimes the chief ministers or the leader, wherever they are, that have carried the day for them. And it was 10 years of incumbency in Tamil Nadu with absence of Jayalalitha that carried the day for DMK. Let's not forget that, it was just a big factor was absence of Jayalalitha in Tamil Nadu. Otherwise, 5 years before that, Jayalalitha had carried Tamil Nadu against all odds. Let's not forget that. So there is the sense, what I believe, Rajdeep, that somehow people are also trying to segregate whether they trust a leader and whether the leader is doing enough within the given circumstances. And that is probably kind of putting up their mind where they are voting for, regardless of which party the leader belongs to. If you are putting in good effort, and if you are seen as a non-corrupt guy who is trying to put in good effort, people are probably putting trust in you. That's what I feel like.
Rahul Kanwal, the final pointer you want to take us through is COVID, which is, also a shadow that has hung over this election, especially since we are in the midst of a third wave.
The biggest issue that people are dealing with is the pandemic. We're in the middle of the Omicron wave. And do voters think that the central government has done enough to deal with COVID? What we'll do is we'll compare and contrast the numbers in all the poll-bound states at one glance so that you can get a sense of how the mood in the states differ on this question. If you look at the number of people who think in Uttar Pradesh that the government has done enough to deal with the economic fallout of COVID, 71% are saying yes, only 23% are saying no. That means that Uttar Pradesh thinks the government's done really well in dealing with COVID. Punjab is 42% yes, 46% saying no. So they're far more unhappy with the government's handling of the economic fallout of COVID. Uttarakhand is 53% saying yes, 37% saying no. Goa is 50% saying yes. They're satisfied with what the government has done in the economic fallout of COVID, 43% saying no. Manipur is 56% saying yes, 29% saying no. Now, what this suggests essentially is that Uttar Pradesh is in a stratosphere of its own, and this, when you contrast with images, say, of the floating bodies in the Ganga, on the banks of the Ganga, you'd imagine that people would be unhappy with the performance of the central government on dealing with COVID, but that is not the case. The data brings that out strong, that in Uttar Pradesh, people actually think that the government has handled the economic situation very well. How did COVID impact your economic status? Now, this is a question where people typically would not mislead voters, because you're being asked, are you better off? Are you worse off? How are you in comparison with the past? So let's take you through what the mood in the poll-bound states is. In Uttar Pradesh, 16% say their income has improved. 64% say their income has decreased. No change is 14%. In Punjab, only 7%. So less than half the number of people in Uttar Pradesh who said their income has improved. Only 7% say their income has increased in Punjab. 74% are saying their income has gone down, which is 10% more than in UP, and 12% say it hasn't changed. In Uttarakhand, 11% say their income is improved, which is less than UP but more than Punjab. 63% say their income has come down, and 16% say there's been no change. In Goa, only 9% say their income has gone up. 82% say their income has gone down, which is more than the other 4 states that I read out so far. And in Manipur, because of a smaller sample, we didn't pick up anybody saying their income had improved. 85% saying their income had come down. Rahul Verma, in a poll on the question of whether your income has gone up or gone down, you're unlikely to find respondents who'd mislead. That is a typical assumption. Why then is there, and if you look at the actual economic data coming out from CMIE for unemployment in Uttar Pradesh, etc., suggests that people in Uttar Pradesh are badly impacted by the pandemic economically. However, in the poll, you've actually got a very high approval rating of the economic handling of COVID. Is that something that baffles you, or do you just think that people like the Prime Minister, they like the BJP government, and therefore they believe that they're giving the benefit of the doubt कि जो किया अच्छा ही किया, best किया भाई, अपनी तरफ से लगे हुए सुबह से शाम?
No, see, these two numbers should baffle anyone, right? On one hand, people are facing hardships, and on the second level, they are not putting the blame of those hardships on their current leaders, whether at the national level or at the state level. So, it's baffling. But this is happening survey after survey. So it's not as if this is first time happening and I should be thinking, why is this survey mysterious? And perhaps I think so there is basically one pocketbook consideration. Your pockets are getting hurt, and that is getting reflected in the surveys. But on the political side, voters have to basically choose between who the other options are, right? And it seems that they are thinking that this crisis has been created by nature. Anyone who would have been in power may not have been able to do anything different. And so, in some ways, they are basically okay with whatever the government managed to do. I don't think they are giving a high thumbs up saying, oh, very well done. But it's just sort of like taking a step back and saying, no one could have done anything differently.
Let me stop you there, because I think we've got a sense of a very complex situation which is emerging. Divergences between the state leadership perceptions and the central leadership perceptions. Clearly, economy hurting people, but not always reflecting in which way your political preferences play out. And that perhaps makes this so much more fascinating. This is, a country where, therefore, it's impossible to predict an election. And remember, as we said, it's a national poll from which we've taken these 5 states specifically because they're going to the polls. Clearly, therefore, the jury is out which way the wind is going to blow in these states. But all states, in a way, are on notice in the next 6 weeks as they go to the polls, and state governments in particular are going to have to face a tough time answering a lot of questions from voters. Thank you all very much for the first part of the Mood of the Nation. Zafar Islam, Vibhakar Shastri will be leaving us, but our other guests will stay with us as we then move to what would happen if Lok Sabha elections were held today. Does the Modi magic, as it's called, remain, or is it also facing a bit of a strain? Back in a moment. You're watching India Today's Mood of the Nation January 2022 poll.